Hello, it's Marcus Patchett speaking for the Academy of Astrology. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up video. That's me, Rod and Mandy. We did a video earlier this year on Saturn and Mars in Capricorn because Saturn and Mars were in Capricorn at the beginning of this year. Mars is no longer in Capricorn, but Saturn is. And this video was really, I decided to do this video just because I saw that Tim Shieff, who I mentioned in that previous video, the link will be down below, is having a bit of a health crisis, and he's been going through it, and he's posted a couple of videos on the internet. For anyone who doesn't know, Tim Shieff is a free runner, he's an athlete, he's a vegan activist, and he's basically going through some health problems at the moment which caused him to not question his veganism, but maybe even compromise it a little bit, and he's going through all kinds of psychological difficulties and whatnot because of it. The reason I'm mentioning this is because in the Saturn and Mars in Capricorn video earlier this year, I mentioned him as an example of somebody who has both of those planets in Capricorn in his birth chart, and said that it was probable that this year it would be an interesting year for his career, and it would probably be a bit of a crisis year. So it is, but I wanted to put this together just because, well, it made me think of a few things, and I have a few things to say about it, and maybe some of those things might be helpful to him, but they will certainly also be interesting for other astrologers, hopefully. Right, so Saturn, the thing to say about, well, first thing to say about Tim Shieff's chart is that he has Saturn and Mars in Capricorn, the Sun in Aries, and the Moon in Cancer, well, lots of interesting things to say about that configuration. But the first thing is that all of those planets in those signs are very dignified, meaning they have a lot of power, they're very strong. And usually when you have a lot of dignified planets in your chart, so he has Sun in its exaltation, the Moon, Cancer, in its own sign, Saturn in Capricorn, one of its own signs, and Mars in its exaltation. So when you have a lot of planets in your own chart that are exalted or in their own signs, then you tend to be more successful in life. And it usually indicates a higher than normal degree of self-possession or confidence. So that's the positive. On the negative, it means that because all of those signs are having a fight with each other, they're all in square or opposition. So the Sun is squaring the Moon. They're at 90 degrees from each other. That, in general psychological terms, and I can only speak in general terms here because I don't have Tim's whole birth chart. I've only got the day when he was born. So this will apply to him and about the million other people who were born on the same day as him in different ways and in different areas of life. But in general, when you have a Sun-Moon square, as I do in my chart and as many of the world's population do, you have to leave your comfort zone to get what you want. Because if your Sun represents your heart, what makes you feel alive, your path in life, and the Moon represents what you do by habit, your habits, what you feel like you need to be comfortable. And when those two are having a bit of an argument, essentially when you're just doing what you need to be comfortable, you don't feel like you're fulfilling your vocation, and when you're setting out to do what you need to do, you don't feel comfortable. So it means you have to leave your comfort zone to get what you want anyway. The Sun in Aries is the kind of Nike Sun. It's the just do it. It's the I've got an Aries Sun, so I relate to this. It's just the get out there, do it, don't hang about, get it done. The Moon in Cancer is more about home, family, food, security. So, you know, your Moon in Cancer will want to stay at home and cook and be with people you care about, and your Sun in Aries is just like, I need to be going out and doing things. So that can give a great deal of impetus, actually. It's psychological friction which can create, you know, like the pearl in the oyster kind of jobby. In Tim's chart, because he was born with both Mars and Saturn in Capricorn, that combination, if you watch the other video that Rod, Mandy and I did about that combination, which kicked off this year, astrological year, beginning at the spring equinox, not at January the 1st, but anyway, whatever. So Mars, Saturn in Capricorn are all about hard work. So because he's got them opposing his moon and squaring his sun, that means that he's somebody who will work really hard and kick his own ass and in order to get things done, and has a really strong sense of discipline, but to the degree that it can become a problem at times. So with Mars and Saturn in Capricorn, Capricorn is the detriment of the moon, and they are opposing the moon. So that's really hard on his moon. Now his moon in Cancer, the moon also represents the body, so it means it generally would have good health, good digestion, have a good sort of family and be comfortable with people. But with Saturn and Mars opposing the moon, even by sign, even if it's not exact, even if it's a wide aspect, he will still have so there'll be some issues about his digestion, or about family, or about his sense of feeling secure in his body at different times. Often the moon, Saturn is the principle of restriction and limitation, and Mars is about work and effort. So he's kind of into intense fasting, really intense physical discipline, and you can see that this comes from there. I wouldn't want to speculate, and certainly not publicly, on what psychological roots that could have. I wouldn't want to speculate also because I don't have his birth chart, so I can't localize those areas into those symbols into any part of his life. But the point there is that it's kind of hard. You can be quite hard on yourself, and there can be a feeling of carefully controlled frustration at all times. And then because they're squaring the sun as well, that he will channel that out into his vocation, into his, he will feel a real need to channel that tension between food, security, home, and discipline, limitation, hard work, get things done kind of stuff. The tension between those two things, he'll channel that out through his vocation, which he does admirably. So that's there in his birth chart. Now the interesting thing about this year is he's going through his first Saturn return, which Rod did a video about, and that link should also be below. The Saturn return is usually a difficult time. It's a time of crisis. It's usually at the end of the 20s. What it means is Saturn returns in the sky to the place it was when you were born, approximately 27, 28 years ago. So usually at that point in your late 20s, you kind of, because Saturn's all about limitation, restriction, but his highest meaning really is the biggest limitation upon us as living beings is death. So it's really, any Saturn transit at its core is about contemplating mortality. So at that time in your life, usually it's an adjustment when you're nearly 30 going, oh God, I'm nearly 30, what am I doing? And all of that. But it's more than that. It's the time when you really fully become an adult, so you get tested. And that's particularly true if you have his birth chart, which has Saturn and Mars squaring his sun and opposing his moon. And the form that test will take is, because Saturn is opposing his moon and in the moon's detriment natally, is stuff to do with feeling like your security, your food. The moon in Cancer is really a food symbol, but it's security, home, family, all the things that make you feel comfortable and secure. You're being denied those things, or those things are being removed. And with Mars in his birth chart natally, they're also being spanked a little bit as well. So this is supposed to be a testing time for him. The other factor that I would, and I'll also mention just in his birth chart, because Saturn's squaring his sun as well, I haven't really talked about that, that gives rise to imposter syndrome, i.e. a feeling of never being quite good enough. Now, because his sun's exalted in Aries and Saturn's in its own sign, that'll not be so much, for him internally, he knows he's worth it. He knows he doesn't have a sense of crappy self-worth, but it's more like other people will question it, and he'll feel the constant need to prove himself. That's what the Sun Saturn is. It's a feeling, it's an imposter syndrome, whether that's internalized more, or I think in Tim's case it's more externalized. It's like he'll feel the need to prove himself, and people will tell him, and he'll have to. So anyway, the other point I wanted to make, just tangential but relevant, is that Pluto is currently in Capricorn. And because I don't have Tim's birth chart, I don't know when where his moon actually is in his birth chart. But Pluto opposing his moon, which it will, I think it probably is now, given what he's going through. Pluto is, the planet symbolizes threats to survival, things that kind of will, Pluto, when it goes over something by transit, which is what we call in astrology when a planet moves over astronomically a point where something significant was in the sky when you were born, Pluto by transit will tear away anything that isn't viable. It threatens survival, and basically anything that survives a Pluto transit is good to go, but it sort of drags you down to the underworld for a little bit while you're going through it. And Pluto moon, it will be through food, through women, through family, and with the sun, it will be through men, through your vitality, with the Pluto, the sun rules your vitality and your heart, the moon rules your body. So whenever you've got those two involved in a configuration, it's going to involve physical health. And I think also the sun has a lot to say about your core values, what you really, your path, your heart. And when that's being kicked by Pluto, you're going to be tearing down a lot of what you believe yourself to be. So his identity, in a way, is being defragmented by this process. This all sounds pretty dire, but actually it serves a purpose. And there are two good things about astrology in this case. One, even not knowing any details of his chart, I can say that when this process will sort of be conclusively over, and that is when Saturn leaves Capricorn and enters Aquarius. Which, and bad astrologer, I haven't checked my ephemeris, but I think it's going to be in 2020. I think Saturn enters Aquarius. I'll have to double check that. But anyway, so when Saturn leaves Capricorn, that process will be over for him. Also, Pluto won't leave Capricorn for a while. But Pluto process is slow and grinding. If I am correct in my speculation that Pluto is aspecting his moon right now, then that process will usually take a year or so. I do know a little bit of something about this Sun, Moon, Pluto business because I have a Sun, Moon, Pluto T-square in my birth chart. My moon is in the opposite sign from Tim's. It's in Capricorn, and I have Pluto in Libra natally. So I have natally a Sun, Moon, Pluto T-square, which kind of makes you a bit obsessive, and you constantly have to tear yourself down and rebuild yourself in different ways, or it's done for you, and you usually resist that process. So the bits of astrological advice I have to Tim are: one, hold on, because this process will come to an end, but it might take longer than you would hope it will. Probably not as bad as this year, because this year was the year that kicked off with both Mars and Saturn in Capricorn. So this year will be really pivotal in helping you work through your shit and re-establish your identity and remove what isn't essential. Two, if Pluto is involved, and I think it probably is, then the key thing is don't hold on to what needs to be let go of. Accept, surrender, because otherwise it's going to get torn away. The tighter you hold on, the more painful the removal of that thing is going to be. And three, because you have a natal Sun, Moon, Mars, Saturn configuration, you tend to kick your own ass a lot as it is. With Saturn transiting its natal position, that tendency is going to be enhanced. So don't be too hard on yourself. If you have a Cancer moon, it means you're basically a sensitive person. Sensitive not in the sense of meaning weak. I mean sensitive as in genuinely being sensitive and empathic, but also having, your feelings are sensitive. Your feelings are sensitive. With the Sun in Aries, you've got a bold sort of King Arthur type spirit, which is great. Mars, Saturn in Capricorn, you'll kick your own ass and do the work. But with the moon in Cancer, you also need to respect that moon, because that moon is getting beaten the shit out of at the moment. And it means nurture yourself a little bit through this process. I just watched a video that he released this morning, which is what inspired me to make this, where he was saying he released a video earlier this week talking about some of the problems and how he'd once or twice eaten meat or eggs in an attempt to, or fish, I think it was, not meat, but he'd eaten animal products because he got so desperate about his health that he was trying to search for some solutions. Then obviously he got some flack from that from other vegans. I'm a vegan, whatever. I mean, I think everybody's on their own journey, but other people have given him some crap, and he said, I deserve it, which, okay, fair enough. You want to put your hands up because you're a vegan advocate and all that, that's noble, but don't internalize that too much, because while it's good to take responsibility, you also want to part of looking after your health is knowing when you need to look after yourself first. And I think you know that, but that's whatever. Okay, and then the final thing I'll say, the eclipse points, the nodes in astrology have also just entered Cancer and Capricorn, which means that at some point there will be an eclipse on his moon. Again, I don't know when because I don't have his birth chart, but that's going to be at some point in the next 2 years as well. That eclipse is going to be a North Node eclipse, and it's going to be a full system reboot. It's going to be for health and diet. It's going to be a shutdown and restart. And it's interesting that change of the nodes happened only last week. And that's when he released this video about his diet. So I think that process is already underway. It's all already underway. I think probably the most useful thing I could say to somebody, to Tim, or to somebody undergoing similarly difficult configurations is don't panic. It will come to an end. That's sometimes the most useful thing you can say. And last but not least, I just wanted to point out my little Yoda behind me, the do or do not, there is no try. I love that poster. That very much is the Mars-Saturn. That's the epitome of Mars-Saturn. Yoda is a Mars-Saturn figure, and that's the highest manifestation. But remember, one of the things about the whole Jedi thing is to be calm, to not be too attached to one thing, or whatever. Anyway, right, hope that was helpful, hope that was enjoyable, and catch you next time. Bye.